This video is a response to one of our subscribers, Jamie Davis, who asks, would you mind doing a video on other consonant approximates like you did with D and voice TH? Thanks for asking, Jamie. I'd be very happy to make videos on each of the occlusive approximant pairs. I think it'd be best to make a separate video for each of them, rather than trying to cram them all into one video. So let's get started on the first one. How are the letters B and V pronounced in Spanish? Are they really pronounced the same as one another? Are there any variations in their pronunciation? Today's video is all about Spanish bilabial occlusives and approximants. First, let's talk about the pronunciation of B and V in Standard Spanish, which is what I recommend all students of the Spanish language learn. And then we'll talk about variations you may encounter in the speech of native Spanish speakers, because not all natives employ standard pronunciation all the time. In Standard Spanish, the letters B and V are pronounced exactly the same as one another. This fact creates a couple of interesting consequences. One consequence is that there are BV homophones, words that are spelled differently and have different meanings, but are pronounced exactly the same. Here are a few examples. Varón, basta, bello, revelar, tuvo. Another consequence is that one of the most frequently seen types of misspelling made by native Spanish speakers is to write B in place of V, or vice versa. So, for example, it's relatively common for natives to spell the word había with a V, and words like vaca with a B. Keep your eye out for this sort of thing, and remember that Spanish speakers sometimes misspell words in their native language, just as we English speakers do. Alright, so what is the standard Spanish pronunciation of B and V? Well, it depends on where these letters fall within the word or phrase. If they appear at the beginning of an utterance or after an M sound, they're pronounced as a bilabial occlusive. That means that the lips touch one another and briefly cut off the airflow, like the English letter B, only a bit softer and less explosive. Let's look at some examples. Banda, banco, botella, vacío, valioso, velo, hambre, cambio, miembro. I hope you were able to hear that B and V are pronounced exactly the same as one another. I also hope you heard that as a bilabial occlusive, B and V are pronounced with the lips coming together and touching, much like an English B, only a bit softer and less explosive. In all other positions within words and phrases, B and V are pronounced as a bilabial approximant. That means that the lips come close to each other without quite touching. Here are some example words with a Spanish bilabial approximant. Listen closely to how it's pronounced. Iba, obra, lobo, nave, lava, huevo, polvo, uva. One very important principle for Spanish students to understand is that pronunciation rules apply across word boundaries. So the rule we mentioned earlier about B and V being pronounced as a bilabial occlusive at the beginning of an utterance does not mean at the beginning of a word, no matter where the word appears in a phrase. It only means at the beginning of an utterance, or when you begin speaking after a pause. Let me show you what I mean with some examples. In all of the following cases, the B or V is pronounced as an occlusive at the beginning of the utterance, but exactly the same letter in exactly the same word is pronounced as an approximant when it's in the middle of the utterance. In other words, when some other word comes before it. Banda, la banda, botella, esa botella, vacío, está vacío, valioso, muy valioso. We also said at the beginning that B and V are pronounced as a bilabial occlusive after an M sound. Notice that we didn't say after the letter M. That's because the M sound is not exclusively associated with the letter M. The letter N is also pronounced as an M sound anytime it appears before a B or V, including across word boundaries. Here are some examples. Convencer, enviar, un banco, ningún vaso. So we could say that B and V are pronounced as a bilabial occlusive after the letters M and N, with the understanding that N is pronounced as M in that position. So let's summarize everything we've learned up to this point. In Standard Spanish, B and V are pronounced exactly the same as one another. They're pronounced as a bilabial occlusive when they appear at the beginning of an utterance or after an M sound. They're pronounced as a bilabial approximant in all other positions. These rules apply not just within a given word, but also across word boundaries. The letter N is pronounced as an M sound before B and V, so rule number 2 applies to both the letter M and N. Alright, I think this is everything you need to know in order to pronounce B and V correctly in Standard Spanish. I have a few additional points to mention and we'll wrap this up. Anytime someone is speaking slowly, emphatically, or trying to articulate very carefully, they tend to pronounce things differently. So if you get a native speaker to pronounce B and V for you so you can observe how they do it, they'll probably pronounce them differently from how they do during natural speech, so beware. Some school teachers in some Spanish-speaking countries teach students that there is, or should be, a distinction between B and V. I believe that this is because ancient Spanish spoken centuries ago did have a distinction between B and V, and language arts teachers tend to associate old with correct. As a result, when enunciating carefully, and especially when reading aloud, some Spanish speakers may pronounce the B and V differently from one another, giving the letter V a sound more like the English V. Of course, even among people who try to maintain the distinction, this effect disappears when they're speaking casually and naturally. Some populations of native speakers in Latin America sometimes pronounce the V sound in place of the bilabial approximant as a dialectal, sociocultural, or stylistic variant. So, for example, people who do this may pronounce the word iba more like iva, and caminaba like caminava. To my knowledge, there's nobody who makes this substitution consistently. It seems that people who do this still pronounce a majority of their bilabial approximants in the standard fashion, and only insert the V sound here and there. I'm sure there's an underlying structure to how they do it, but whatever the pattern is, I'm unaware of a rule that describes it. Of course, as always, my recommendation is that students of Spanish stick to Standard Spanish pronunciation, which we described earlier and summarized with those 5 principles, and which doesn't have an English-style V sound. Alright, this has been our discussion of Spanish B and V. If you found this video interesting and useful, please give us a like, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our future videos. Also, if you have any questions on any topic related to the Spanish language, please ask in the comments. I'd be happy to consider making a special video just for you.